Let's have a conversation now on AgriTalk in the Situation Room. Here we promote meaningful discourse on agriculture, agribusiness, food security, as we know that food security is one of the four pillars of the Big Four agenda. And we've been having conversations in the last couple of days on what is happening in the agriculture sector in the country, especially in crop production. We had a conversation on what's happening to rice production. We've had a conversation on how to empower the youth to participate in agribusiness. We'll have a conversation today now on the other side, livestock, okay, which is a major source of meat for our people. That's where we get our meat from, livestock. And it's a major source of livelihood for very many people in our country. Joining us in the studio in the Situation Room is the Principal Secretary for the State Department of Livestock in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives, Harry Kimtai. Asante sana, karibu to the Situation Room.
Thank you, Eric, for inviting me to come to the Situation Room. Actually, it's my first time to come here, and I'm really impressed with the discussions that I've been hearing going on in regard to what's happening in the country daily. So this is really good, and it's an opportunity for me today to also talk about issues agriculture and more so in livestock subsector and see how we are faring on, considering that it's one of the Big Four agenda.
Right. Indeed.
Thank you.
When you talk about the livestock subsector, so a huge part of this country actually is set aside for livestock production or is best for livestock production. And very many people in this country, in many counties, are in livestock production. Just give us a lay of the country and livestock production and consumption of meat and where we are.
Actually, I don't think we use the word set aside. I think it is just the way nature has already decided to set our country into. We have the high rainfall areas,
yes,
which is suitable for certain kind of livestock production. And then you have other areas which is deficient in rainfall, and therefore it suits a certain kind of livestock farming. We say that 80% of our country is arid and semi-arid. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what activity takes place there? Mainly it is livestock, because livestock doesn't really require a lot of rainfall if there is just enough forage to cover what the animals can take. And therefore, you find that that big chunk of our land now is set aside for livestock production. The other areas, which is a part of the Rift Valley and central Kenya, is suitable for because of high rainfall area. It's suitable for certain kind of farming that is like dairy farming. All right, you have where people now are specialized in dairy farming, and therefore you'll find that the dominant livestock production activity that takes place in those areas are dairy farming, which is basically for milk. And then we have other areas like Nyanza, because of the challenges they are facing with diseases. Certain kind of livestock will thrive there because of resistance to disease. So you'll find that they have the livestock, yes, but their production is not high because of challenges of diseases. So that's how our country has been set. But now what happens is that the government comes up with the programs that is tailored towards certain areas. For example, in northeastern areas, we have challenges that faces that part of the country. One is a frequent outbreak of drought. All right, and therefore you find that the farmers there, they lose their livestock during drought season. And we've seen this comes in a cycle of about 5 years. Now it has been happening after 5 years. And therefore what happens is the government comes up with specialized programs. Some of these programs includes what's called the resilience programs that will be able to sustain these farmers in their challenges. One, we have the boreholes, that because livestock requires water. And therefore to enable them continue sustaining themselves, we do we dig boreholes for them. That's number one. We also do what's called water pans. And then we also provide what's called the marketing infrastructure. That's we build markets for them because they produce a lot of animals and they need to market where they are able to sell. They're able to sell their stock to those buyers who want. So those are the programs that are specifically tailored to meet their demands. And on this other area where we have high rainfall and therefore it's dairy production, what we do, we support them in making sure that we bring farmers into a cooperative movement or cooperative societies where we supply them with things like dairy, the milk coolers.
Yeah.
Now we've been able to distribute about over 400 milk coolers to these dairy farmers, because what they need is they must, when they milk their animals, they must take their milk to the nearest cooling station that they have. If they don't do that, then they are going to lose in terms of their milk going bad. Yeah. So we have got to strengthen that. We must make sure that we give them such kind of infrastructure so that they continue in their production. This will also enable the processors, what you call the milk processors, the ones who now come and offtake from these cooperatives. And therefore, the farmer doesn't take long. You remember those days when the farmers used to stand on the roadshow, on the roads, waiting for the milk canters to come and take their milk. They pour their 2 or 5 liters. Now we're telling them, don't worry. You take your milk to a cooperative where we've put a cooler and pour there. It's measured. You are given a receipt because we have computerized some of them. And then you go back home. Go and continue with the activities of farming. Whatever time the truck comes, whatever time the processor comes, they will find the milk still in good quality.
Yeah.
So those are the infrastructure, those are the policies that the government puts in place depending on the need of the area.
And is this happening countrywide?
Yes.
Or are you looking at specific counties where this takes place, or across the country?
This is happening across the country. As I told you, we've mapped out the livestock production in terms of the conditions that are available in each area. If you look at Northeastern, for example, we are now looking at value addition. We are talking about the abattoirs, slaughterhouses. We don't want them now to sell their live animals from those markets. We are now saying do value add. That means you should be able to slaughter these animals, put them in the chillers, transport them to Nairobi, or wherever place that you have the market. So this is happening across. We have mapped out according to the livestock production of each of the areas. So it's not about county. It's just about the region.
Okay, let me ask, how many regions have you mapped out in total?
We've mapped out, for example, North Rift, where we know it's good for milk production. Central Kenya. South Rift is also good for milk production. And then North region, that's for beef production.
Okay.
Including now part of Kajiado and Narok.
Now, these regions, how many counties do you have in each of these regions?
For example, in Northeastern, we have 14 counties.
Okay.
All right. We have specifically 14 counties, which these are specifically for, and that's ASAL counties. And then you have the other 13, which is semi-arid, right?
Now, in the counties that you consider to be perhaps your key centers, how many centers do you have in these key places?
What we do, like I'll go the side of dairy first. Let me start from dairy. We've distributed over as I told you, over 400 coolers now to cooperative societies in this region. So, for example, we go to Meru, we see the production of milk. What is the need for coolers there? Because farmers, we ask them, they make their request. We ask, and we go do an assessment, and you realize that they need a capacity of 3,000. So we supply them. We do what's called a partnership. They put up the infrastructure, that's the housing, and then we supply them with a cooler, which comes with a standby generator, because sometimes there's a challenges of power. So we supply them with a standby generator and a solar panel that will help to heat water for cleaning, just making the hygiene and safety of the milk. So we've supplied in central over say 150 coolers. So each county is getting like about 20 or
so. Where I'm going with my question is, of the SACCOs that exist, or these groupings that exist, cooperatives, they call them SACCOs?
No, cooperatives.
Thank you. Of the cooperatives that exist, what percentage would you say have been able to receive this assistance that you are offering?
Because what we look at, you don't look at all the cooperatives.
No.
We look at the ones that are only have come together for the purpose of dairy farming, aggregating for their
Yes.
members. So we can say in terms of the cooperatives, we've supplied equal almost 60% of those who are in dairy sector. We are still to supply them more because we realize there's need of having more coolers, and now even reducing it to a lower capacity of 2,000 so that they're able to benefit in terms of we don't need a lot of space, just need a small space. So we're looking at each group. If they are few and they're able to produce 2,000 liters of milk, we supply them the 2,000 capacity. If they're able to produce the one, we have the 3,000 capacity, we give them 3,000 capacity. Then we are now going to supply those big cooperatives that have up to 5,000 or 10,000 capacity. So we are supplying them as per the need basis based on their demand.
What happens to the farmer who doesn't want to take his milk to the cooperative and wants to sell it to his neighbors, whoever wants it?
We have what we are trying to do is under the dairy board, we are trying to come up with the regulations to help the sector. Sometimes there are those farmers who they need their daily income.
Yeah.
They are not able to wait
For 30 days
30
to get
days
paid by the processor.
to be paid by the processor. Now, what we've done is we have allowed those ones to continue selling without really going to, because you don't restrict, you don't say you must go. Being a member of the cooperatives gives you other advantages. And therefore, it's your decision as a farmer. Do you want to be in the cooperative? Because when you go to the cooperative, you have a leverage of sharing, being the part of the larger group, and therefore you tap into what's called economics of scale, because you're able to aggregate all of you and negotiate the price with the processor. That's one. Two, you also enjoy other say, as a member of the cooperatives, they give you subsidy, animal feeds on loan, then it is deducted at the end of the month. So they have that kind of arrangement where they support their members. So, but it's your decision.
Do they have a credit facility as well?
There are those who have they have partnered with the banks to have a credit facility, and even to have to make sure that the animals are insured, because some of them have gone into high value animals, which they have to make sure that they take care in terms of risk of disease.
Right.
So this is all happening because now they're able to come together, and they're able to negotiate with the insurance, they're able to negotiate with the banks, and say these are our members. They look at they look at the balance sheet of the cooperatives and say, okay, they are worthy. They're able to repay. So all these things is happening because we've got to put them in that order so that we as a government can support them as well. Then other institutions also can come on board to support them.
As well.
Yes.
As we look at food security as a whole, I mean, there's so many things that, as you talk about, these measures that you're putting in place to make sure that everybody is able to play on a level playing field, right? How do you take into, because food security is that there's a provision of food, but there's also mitigating the problems that may come about.
Yeah.
Last year, we saw stories of a milk glut and farmers having to throw away their milk, right? Most recently, we've seen the stories of infected meat. I think as of 2 days ago, infected meat making its way into the market. How are you able to deal with those things to balance out all of this?
Let me start with the milk glut. That was very interesting discussion that time, because we, as a government, we've been pushing the farmers to increase their production.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, here
It's
there is
too much.
too much. They're not able to sell, and the processors are not taking. If the processors are taking, they bring down the price because of that glut in the market.
Yeah.
Now, we went round with the dairy board and tried to establish what is causing this glut. Of course, there are questions also. Members of parliament were raising these questions. We were saying there's also the supply from the neighboring countries. Because if you look at I look at the region, I think the dairy sector in Kenya is the most established. But now the region is also within the region, other countries of the region are also increasing their production. And where do they look at the market? They've also to come to Kenya and say this is where the market, because the per capita consumption of milk in Kenya is the highest in the region, not even in the region, say in Africa. So you find that therefore, if they go and produce in another country, they are producing at a lower cost because of the cost of production in that country. And therefore, they are able to sell and compete with our farmers here. So that is one of the reasons that caused what's called the market glut that was there, because now our farmers with a high price, they were not able to sell. And the consumer will always go for where they make an
Value
extra
for
saving,
money.
For sure.
value for money. And therefore, if this was being delivered to them and they're able to get it at this price, then they will choose. And therefore, the demand for milk went down. And we also realized that there were unscrupulous traders who were bringing in without following the due process, following the approvals of the government, because we do regulate the importations of milk through the Kenya Dairy Board. When we looked at the statistics of the importation and what is being consumed in the country, we realized that there is a slight gap in the sense that what we are approving for importation and what is in the country is not matching. We had to go around with the support of the anti-counterfeit and police, multi-agency team, dairy board inspectors. We went around and we realized that we found a lot of milk that has not been, like milk powder that has been being sold within our country that do not have the right documentation, importation document. And therefore we confiscated this. And we destroyed it with the anti-counterfeit.
So it was
Now,
Magendo, not that it
there was
did not meet the standards.
Magenda. There was Magenda also inside there. But since then, I think with the proper controls and ensure, if we are trading with our partners like Uganda, for example, because there was a lot of complaint that this milk, is it coming from Uganda?
Yep.
Is it true that Uganda is able to produce? That was another
More than
one.
us, yeah.
More than us, because we never realized that Uganda was also improving their production. And we sent their delegation of high government delegation through the PS trade, and then Dr. Kipto, the dairy board, and the livestock production officers from my department. And they went there and they realized that, yes, true, there are also processes of dairy in Uganda.
Yep.
And not only Uganda, even Rwanda. And they want to sell to Kenya.
Yeah.
So the market is Kenya. But because of their cost of production, as I said, then there was a little bit of challenge. But now that has been able to be controlled. Those who are allowed to import from Uganda, they are allowed to import, and therefore there is now what's called a trade that's going on. Our farmers are also supplying well. Our CS directed then that KCC, for example, mop up, because His Excellency gave directives that because we established Kenya Cooperative Society, creameries, purposely to take care of our farmers. And at such a need, what they need to do is to offtake all the milk and then process it into powder.
Yep.
Keep it for future use as a strategic food reserve. And that was done because the government pumped in additional funds through KCC, and they were able to mop now the extra milk that was in the country. And therefore, that brought what's called stability in the prices. So that was a good decision that we had to support our farmers, and therefore, because KCC increased their price. When KCC increased their price, now farmers who shifted to KCC. Now, these other processors also needed to have continuous supply, and therefore they needed now to compete. So that situation was rectified, and therefore the prices of milk went up. Right now, I'm sure my dairy farmers are enjoying, because the prices is above about 40, 30, 35, 36, 37, up to 40. Others are offering, if you deliver, they're offering even up to 42. So you can see it's good per liter. So, and we have not stopped the trade between us and Uganda, for example. So it is still ongoing. So everything is normal.
What is
so
the
that's
demand?
what's called interventions that the government puts in place to rectify a situation when in the market, for example.
Are our daily farmers able to actually meet the entire demand of milk in the country?
No.
So what's the shortfall in terms of percentages?
What our target is to produce about 5.2 million liters per day, all right? And we're saying that the increase of the demand now is high, so the shortfall is about, we are looking at a shortfall of about 20% kind of.
20%.
Yeah, which is filled with importations from the region. We right now don't have a lot of importations from Europe, for example. So we have Uganda has taken up Burundi, and they all came to Kenya. They land from Kenya. In fact, they are buying animals from Kenya to go and do production.
And use for. We will have a conversation about that, Harry, because one of the things that you're saying is that it's the milk cost of producing a liter of milk in Kenya is higher than the cost of producing a liter of milk in our neighboring countries.
True.
These people have come to this country to learn how to produce milk, and they are able to meet that demand with a lower cost. We'll discuss that, and also we'll talk about the other question that Ndu had asked about talking about meat safety, right? And the issue surrounding meat safety and how the government then assures that there is safe meat circulating in the market.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. Spice up your life.
Let's start with milk. You've just told us that our Kenyan farmers are not able to meet their demand for milk consumption in the country. I'm sure you'll tell us the similar story in terms of meat, when it comes to beef, when it comes to sheep and goat, when it comes to fish. Okay. The other day we were having a conversation about rice. Same story. Wheat, same story. Now that's one. Cost of production is a concern that keeps coming up whenever we have these conversations. You have also just told us when you had a milk glut, when Tanzanians and Ugandans are bringing their milk and Rwandans are bringing their milk across the country, it's cheaper than ours. Why is our cost of production so high across the board? Whether it's milk, whether it's meat, whether it's rice, right? Let's just go with the livestock. Why is our cost of production so high?
Thank you, Eric. Indeed, we've done the analysis in terms of cost of production. For example, to produce 1 liter of milk in Kenya, both we have the free-range production. We've got the semi-zero grazing, and then the full zero grazing production. Because all this is done, it's costed. And therefore, when you go the free range, because previously we used to do a lot of free range production in dairy areas. But because of the depletion of the forage, and therefore farmers are forced to now look for additional forage to supplement the grass, for example. And you find that now, if they do that additional, then they have to pay for the cost.
Yeah.
And therefore, when they look at the dairy meal, for example, the concentrates that they need so that the animals and the proteins that the animals need so that they can have high yield production. Because apparently we've also moved into high yield type of animals. So we no longer have the crosses, as we used to call them. So we've tried to take it up because of our AI service. One of the countries that has really embraced AI service is Kenya, since that we just took it over from independence.
Yeah.
We continued with it. And then the challenge comes now in the terms of cost of production. So you find that what we need are the concentrates, the cotton seed cake, sunflower seed cake. We need maize, so that the grain, so that we have the mix, so we get what's called our dairy meal. Now, all these ingredients, we don't produce it, and it's not enough in the country, and therefore we rely on our neighboring countries because they have more specialized in the what's called the oil crops, cotton, sunflower, and therefore the byproduct of that is what you call the cotton seed cake. We've got the sunflower cake, and then also the production of maize. So we are importing from them, and therefore we are paying additional cost. While you look at their cost of production because they source these things locally, and therefore their production goes down. So that's where the difference between us and them in terms of costing. And then in Uganda, for example, they're still doing free range, and therefore, while we have concentrated on semi-zero grazing and zero grazing for high-yielding animals, them they're still on free range. So that's where the difference comes in. And then eggs, for example, again, eggs, the layers, you need a lot of concentrates. You need the chick mash, you need all this is grains, all right, and the crude protein that you require from some of the crops, which we're not producing enough.
Well, yes.
Yes.
This is information that we know.
Yes.
And we've known this for some time.
Yes.
And what have we done about it? I mean, we even hear sometimes of an overproduction of maize to the point where farmers are complaining about the price of maize, what they're being offered by the National Cereals Board. And these are the products that we require to ensure that we meet that end of, say, our beef or our poultry or of our milk production. Surely this very Ministry of Agriculture are supposed to be the people who ought to be telling us what they have done to ensure that this problem we keep talking about has actually been halted.
I'll tell you what we've done. All right. Number one, we are now trying to provide what's called the e-voucher, for example, the subsidy now program that it was rolled out. We used to have the subsidy, but that was basically for what you call we were giving to fertilizer. All right. So it was only fertilizer. And if farmers are given fertilizer, they were going into maize production. So sometimes they produced a lot of maize and then cereals was not buying. But we are saying that, and then they were depending on the price that is given by the cereals to determine what is the cost of production this time, because it was all calculated by the government, say cereals is going to buy at this price.
Yeah.
The rest, the millers now can buy. And the government was buying a strategic bags of about 3 million bags just to keep in the strategic reserve. Then the rest is supposed to be taken up by the market. Now, for us, we are producing this maize, and the maize that we are producing in the country is all for human consumption. We don't have what to produce for livestock, for example. So what we're saying now is that we've, in last financial year, what we did is we allowed the millers to import maize, we call it yellow maize, specifically to use it to make animal feeds so that they can reduce the price. So that is one way of trying to stabilize, reduce the cost of production in the livestock sector. So that is one intervention that the government put in place. And we're also trying to now to tell the farmers to change. For example, we used not to do a lot of silage because we're only relying on grass, hay, all right? But you realize that now they need to, they need to plant maize, not only for the grain. They also need to plant maize to make silage for the animals.
Yeah.
And if you make that, then it reduces your cost of production by almost 50%.
If I'm hearing you right, you're saying we don't have food security.
We do have food security.
How do we have food security when we ourselves cannot actually produce what we need? How do we have food security when we have to keep depending on other people to supply us with the very, very inputs that we ourselves can actually produce in the country? What is the government plan to ensure that things like, say, cotton production, sunflower production, these are things that we've had in the country before.
Yeah.
Why have we not pushed this agenda so that we're actually able to meet these needs from within ourselves?
Good, very good question. One, you see, initially we were producing those crops because our farms were large then. But because of subdivision, we've reduced our farms to a smallholder in the sense that there's no more mechanization. Now, what you're doing, and what as a ministry, what we did is we did present a cabinet paper to the cabinet to request that the government releases some of the land that was with the government land to private investors to come on board, because the cost of, the issue of when you want to invest in agriculture, for example, buying land, it's very costly.
Yeah.
The government still has land that can give to these private investors in what's called the PPP, public-private partnership. And they bring in what's called mechanization. If they're doing, say, for example, sunflower, they're doing thousands of acres, and therefore there will be enough production, mechanization, there will be enough for feeds. So you find that now with that paper, once it's approved, then the government is going to ease the land that is lying idle, is not being plowed, is not being put in the proper use. So that's one area that the government has looked at. As a ministry, it was our initiative to ensure that we bring in now on board the other private sectors. So that's one of the critical areas that we are banking on. And then two, we also developing, like for example, in livestock, we've passed what's called the livestock policy. And in livestock policy, it is going to guide us in coming up with what's called a livestock master plan. Now, we really want to understand the kind of production systems that we are talking about, where we're able now to attract the investors to come in. And with that, we'll be able to reduce our costs, because once we allow proper systems and plans that are there, each region will now say, this is our value chain. They will now be able to reduce the cost of production in that area because of what is required to invest in that area. And it will now mean what's called the economics of scale, where an investor comes and says, okay, this is what I need to invest. With the support of the government policies, then they come on board. So that way it will reduce the cost of production. Two, it will make us food secure, as opposed to relying on imports. Because even when you rely on imports from the other countries, when their supply also goes down, what do? They don't supply us.
Yeah.
All right?
They supply locally. What I'm hearing you say, Bwana PS, is yes, there's a roadmap towards getting there, but mostly we look at mechanized agriculture. Is there no way of using smallholder farmers, them forming cooperatives, and knowing that they can actually supply to this particular value chain? Because probably farmers right now are growing food knowing they are growing food for human consumption to take to a market. But if they knew that, okay, we need, for example, to grow sunflower or to supply sunflower seeds to farmers, dairy farmers who will come and buy. If you can create those linkages, is it not possible to just organize smallholder farmers in a particular region that is very good with sunflower production? Let them form a cooperative. This is a ministry that's also in charge of cooperatives. Let them know that they can supply, create that market linkage for them, and then this also improves.
I think that is what we've done, Eric. I want to tell you that through what's called the Agricultural Sector Transformation and Growth Strategy, that is what we are trying to bring on board. Number one, we are trying to aggregate all the smallholder farmers. Once you aggregate the smallholder farmers, you're able now to bring on board what's called the private sector, who are the off-takers. They now be able to say, with constant supply of this product, of this value chain, then they will continue in their production. They will continue in value addition and therefore there's a linkage now between these farmers.
Yeah.
You see, initially, the smallholder farmer was just independent farmer.
Yeah.
Trying to, if it's a milk production, they want to look for the source where they can sell their milk, and sometimes they're frustrated. But now if you aggregate all these farmers, and you're able to advise them and say, now this is the off-taker. They will come and off-take. They have a warehouse, for example, and then there will always be a synergy between the off-taker, because the off-taker will be able to supply some of the inputs to the farmer, because it's called contract farming. All right? One, you're guaranteed that this supplier, once they're going to production, they will always give it to you. So that's the area that we are focusing in. And if you look at the 9 pillars of ASTGS, one of it is to bring these farmers together, aggregate these farmers into one. And that's our pillar number one, which is really critical. And when you do that, you are going to increase the income of the smallholder.
What will it take? How long will it take for this to actually get to the ground and start seeing the aggregation of farmers, the creation of awareness, training for farmers, for them to see the value? I mean, the strategy is already out. It's already been published. It's been approved, right?
Yeah.
So the next steps would be now is going to any part of the country and hearing farmers telling you that we actually had a meeting here and people from the county and the Ministry of Agriculture were telling us to do this, and we're already looking at modalities of bringing ourselves together into one giant cooperative that then takes advantage of this. How long will this take?
I don't want to say how long it is going to take. It is something that is going to take us 10 years, because our strategy is 10 years. But it has already started. Number one, through programs. For example, in the Ministry of Agriculture, we have, and Crops the department, we have a program called the Climate Smart Agriculture, which is supporting the farmers, grouping the farmers, and they pick in every county where they're operating. And they're in 23 counties. Now, in those counties, the farmers pick their value chain, meaning they can produce with the lowest cost, the value chain that they can produce with the lowest cost, or they have what's called comparative cost advantage in that county, and therefore they pick it. Once they've picked it, now they are able to be supported, trained through the program, and then we also bring on board the off-takers. Now you can see already we're not just developing the strategy, we develop the strategy and develop the programs as well. And then we have what's called the National Agriculture and Rural Inclusivity Program, again, in the other counties. So therefore, we have covered the entire country in terms of the programs. And this we are doing together with the counties. So the counties identify their value chain. If it is honey, if it is poultry, if it is dairy, all these farmers are now supported. Groups are supported, and they are divided into, there are farmers who are now going into hay production. Specifically, their business is to do hay. Why? They have farmers, their counterparts who have picked the other value chain of dairy. So they have to supply the hay to
the dairy
farmer. So that is the linkage that we are now doing as a ministry to ensure that our strategy is implemented. Yes.
Okay. So now, every now and then we hear stories of, infected meat, or we hear story of game meat being in butcheries. We hear every now and then zebra and I don't know what else finds its way behind the glass. In terms of food security, making sure that food is not just available, but that it is safe for human consumption. Now, how then do you tackle things like this? I mean, we've had an outbreak of infected meat just the last 2 days in certain parts of the
Bomet,
city.
yeah.
In certain parts of the country, sorry. So how do you mitigate against this?
Number one, we agree as a ministry and as a country, we are saying if food is not safe, then it is not food. Because that is poisonous. That is affecting the health of our population. So we're putting in all measures. For example, when it comes to issues of livestock meat, all the meat that you're supposed to consume must be inspected by veterinary public health officers. All right? That must be.
Yep.
It is there in the Meat Act, so it has to be, and the Veterinary Public Health Act. So, and we have a mark. If you go to your local butcher, I don't know if you've seen, you see some marking.
The stamp.
The stamp.
Yes.
Yep.
That shows that meat has been inspected. Now, there is no way veterinary public health officials can inspect just the meat that is being displayed there. They have to inspect at source, at the slaughterhouse, at the abattoir. So the inspection starts at the abattoir. All right. Anything that comes in between that filters into the value chain or the system, then that is something that has been introduced outside. That's number one. Number two, preservation, because we have some chemicals that are used to preserve food. All right, meat, for example.
Yeah.
There what's allowed, allowable limits, and what is not allowed. So I think now that's where what's called the public health officials take over from there. That they must inspect every premise to see how the food is received, how is it stored, and how is it disposed or sold to the consumers.
Yeah.
Now, all that system must be monitored very closely. So, so the safety of food is really key, and that's where now the government inspectors come on board. Any other that is found to be selling the meat that is not allowed, game meat, for example, then those are the people that we normally arrest and take them to court.
You know why I'm smiling?
Yes.
PS.
Yeah.
As you're saying, all
I
meat.
thought I was answering the question until you smiling.
No, you are answering the question, but my mind drifted when you said all meat must be inspected. So I'm thinking, I go to my rural home and I'm slaughtering chicken.
You slaughter
Do I ask the
local vet to come
yes,
and inspect.
if I have goat and I have sheep and I'm slaughtering, if I have a cow and I have many guests and I'm slaughtering, do I bring them? This is why I was smiling.
Yes, I will tell you.
Yes.
One, as long as you're having guests, if it's consumption for your family, you're slaughtering your chicken, you just pick from your farm, you don't need to inspect. But as long as you're having a public gathering, it's defined. The number that you're gathering for the purpose of, say, sharing a meal, you must inspect.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know how many people in this country then have gone against those requirements?
We are supposed to, as long as you're bringing in, you're gathering people.
What's the threshold?
It's like a wedding. Like
What's the
this.
threshold?
Call the inspector
What's the
to come.
threshold?
How
How
many
many people?
At least if you're having more than 10 people, you must. Because if you're slaughtering a goat, and the number of people are going to consume that goat. If you're slaughtering a cow, for example, the number of people are going to slaughter that cow. All right?
It's a high number. One of the things that people in that sector then would talk about is those multiplicity of laws. There's the Health Act, there's
the Meat Act,
there's whichever act, and then the expert in meat is the veterinary doctor.
Yes.
That is the one who's been trained on what is meat, what is quality meat. He inspects this meat at the slaughterhouse, and then he releases the meat after putting a stamp. It's put in this container that's written red meat, and it has the number for the slaughterhouse. Goes to the market. Now, there's what we have seen recently in terms of the market then doing its own things to meet market demand, which includes now putting excess amounts of sodium metabisulfite, for example, the preservatives and all, and also unscrupulous people finding their way into bypassing the slaughterhouse, slaughtering antelopes and zebras and bringing them to the market. But the
You-
vet
you-
guy
you've left out donkeys.
and the donkeys.
Yes.
Donkey is good meat now.
But
No, donkey is now meat.
Donkeys is meat.
Donkey is
It's only that we have
classified
banned,
as
we have
meat.
banned the
Export for
slaughter
now.
of because again there's no production of donkey. What's
The
happening?
donkey population
Donkey population is reducing, and so there are challenges because of theft of.
Okay,
Of donkeys.
while we're
But
taking-
it's now licensed. It's gazetted as
and
meat.
camels.
Camels is gazetted as
Is meat for a long time.
meat.
Now the question was, so the vet guy has only works at the slaughterhouse and does not go beyond the slaughterhouse. After the slaughterhouse is somebody else who is a public health officer who looks at public health but does not really understand meat. Should we not be bringing the vet person also to the butchery to look at this meat and say, this is good quality meat? Because the public health officer is looking at, is this butchery clean? Does it have white tiles? Is the butcher wearing an overcoat? And that is not necessarily the quality of the meat.
You see, the quality of the meat is determined from the animal. Is the animal infected? Like what she was saying, that we had cases where people are consuming infected meat.
Yeah.
For example, anthrax. All right? An animal is sick, and somebody takes it to the slaughter or slaughters for public consumption. That's an animal that should be condemned. And therefore, it is not good into the system. That's number one. That's why the veterinary public health officer is crucial at the time of slaughter. What animal are you slaughtering? Are you slaughtering a healthy animal or are you slaughtering a sick animal?
Yeah.
So it is determined at that particular time. And therefore, the division here comes very clear. The demarcation of the roles played by the two professionals are very clear because they are trained differently. They are trained to observe, to look at the animal diseases. When they slaughter, you might think, what are they looking at this animal? Because when they slaughter the animal, when the animal has been slaughtered, they check the intestines, they check the internal organs to see how they've been functioning, and they're able to determine what kind of disease. So in simple observation, they can do that. And they also collect samples sometimes, and if they suspect, then they can take it to the lab, and that test and confirm what kind of disease is this, because that is happening all the time when you take it through the procedural way of handling food of animal origin. Now, the public health officer comes here at the time of the animal. This meat has been certified to be fit for human consumption. And therefore, it is now going to the normal premises. Now, the premises inspection is done by the public health officer because they look at many other factors. Do you have water? Do you have toilet? Do you have how ventilated is the room?
Yeah.
And where are you keeping this meat that you have delivered? Do you have proper storage facilities? Because some of them don't have proper storage facilities, and what they do is they add a lot of chemicals for preservatives. And at the end of the day, it affects the health of a consumer. So these two professions are really key. I cannot say we need to allow the other one to go beyond this. No. Let's stick to what is our role as a veterinary officer, public health. What is the role of the public health officer?
Yeah.
And let them be strict on their work. And for example, the public health, they are supposed to be doing what's called periodic checks. They don't stand there every day. But the veterinary guy has to be at the slaughterhouse every time.
For every new animal.
For any new animal that's being slaughtered, must be certified. But the public health, they have systems where they can say you have been licensed. They check what you are supposed to put in place using a checklist, and then they again come, because after some time they have to come and see again what kind of what are you using, the food grain what's called the food grain materials that you are using. If, for example, it must be in you don't just use any other kind of iron sheet, for example. If you have the type of knives you are using, a lot of other things that come in place, right? The sharpeners, because as when you sharpen, there are a lot of, you see, when you look at that, all this goes into what's called your health.
Yeah.
So, and the public health officer is the one who checks all those tools of trade that is being used.
To ensure the safety.
Yeah, even milk, the way you transport milk in a jerrycan, it's not allowed.
No.
And you're going to sell it in Kudarai, for example, all the way from Kiambu or all the way from
And it's in a
Nairobi,
plastic. It's
and
in a plastic jerrycan.
How long does it take for that milk to go bad? Short time. So we again recommend certain kind of
Of
to be used,
containers
of
to be
containers
used.
to be used.
Let's hear from our callers who are on the line and they'd like to ask you a couple of questions. This one is Yegon. He's a very good listener of ours. Yegon, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Eric.
How are you?
I am fine. How about the entire team and PS?
Good. How
Good,
are
we
you?
well,
have.
thank you,
Thank
Egon.
you, thank you, Egon.
Yes, I have a couple of 3 questions.
Okay.
One is between a veterinary officer and a public health officer, who is supposed to inspect the meat. Number 2 is that the cost of treating now animals is so high. And we have a lot of counterfeit drugs on the acrobats. How is the ministry doing so that they can reduce the cost of treatment and even having the genuine drugs at the market? Lastly, is about the training. I've seen that this is a state of department,
Yep.
and they normally have their training facilities. But their mode of advertisement is still an old model of through magazine. They have no page. So getting the advertisement to their colleges is quite normally a difficult task. Alafu application also is normally that through you write down. You apply, send through the G4S to the facility so that you can be now followed up. So at least if they can make it online, it could be better. But the last comment is a positive comment that we thank them for the price of milk. We have seen the price increase from 23 shilling up to now. We are enjoying, maybe for example, let me speak for Nandi, we are enjoying at the price of 40, 36, 40. Lastly is for City Muka. City don't stay in Nairobi. Nowadays, each puja, they inspect meat.
They do.
Regardless of in the village, even at the village level, we have veterinary officers, but there are few. Thank you.
Okay. Asante sana, Yegon. 0719-012-600 if you have a question for the PS. Those 3 questions, PS. I think the first one you'd already answered, who between the vet and public health inspects meat. That one I think you've already tackled. So this issue of the cost of treating animals and the proliferation of counterfeits in the market.
Thank you. I think the question Diego has really asked, and he seems to really understand the sector very well, and he follows it until he knows that we now have even the village inspectors. What I just said is trying to validate. One, yes, I do agree that the cost of treating of animals is now high because most of the veterinary guys who are out there are now in private sector.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is what they charge. It's not, we have very few government officers now. Before, we used to have the extension officers, the veterinary officers. But now, that because of the structural adjustment programs in the 80s, the government was advised not to have, to allow the veterinary practitioners to engage directly with the farmers and determine the cost of treating an animal. 2, I think the veterinary officers, why it's becoming expensive and they look at them as expensive is because of the kind of drugs that they are now using to treat animals. I think it has gone up. The cost of veterinary drugs have gone up. And that's why farmers feel it's expensive. But what I can say is the issue of counterfeit. We have within our State Department what's called the Veterinary Medicine Directorates that is supposed to license all the veterinary drugs that come into the country. Just like we have the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. And therefore, we don't rule out cases of counterfeit, people bringing in these drugs, because people, they want to make scrupulous, very quick money.
Yeah.
But we have officers now who are going around inspecting, making sure that the licensed agrovets are stocking what is approved for sale. And we also urge the farmers to verify because you must have a registration number in every drug that you're buying. And even if the veterinary officer is supplying you, ask the veterinary officer treating your animals, which drugs are these? Because sometimes they carry them and they just come and treat the animals without you knowing what. You must have a book in your farm that when the veterinary officer has treated your animal, what did this veterinary officer treat the animal?
Yeah.
Was it foot and mouth disease? was it East Coast fever?
And what medicine did they?
What medicine did he? And must indicate their number, because we have the Kenya Veterinary Board as well. So we have two institutions that registers the veterinary practitioner and the one that licenses importations of veterinary drugs. So this veterinary officer who is coming to your farm must show an identification that I am a registered, fully trained veterinary surgeon or veterinary practitioner or a para-professional, and then you allow them to treat the animals. The issue of cost now is something that is, you have to determine what kind of disease is this and what procedure is it.
It's going to be used.
And
1
then
hour is a short time.
the other one is training. Yes, we have the Animal Health Training Institutes. We have Ahiti Kabete, Ahiti Ndomba, Nyahururu. We have the Dairy Training Institute in Naivasha. And then we have the Meat Training Institute here at River. Now, what we've been doing, and I agree with him, we now need to use the online application.
Sure.
We've been using the government advertisement, the MyGov. We've been using the daily newspaper circulation. But now we need to transition that to what's called
Go online.
Online. So I think I agree with this.
Embrace digital, Bonaparte.
We have embraced. We have embraced. I think it's only that also we have challenges. We are seeing a decline in the number of professionals who are coming in, especially the paraprofessionals. There's a decline in those who apply. So we are now trying to sensitize them, to tell them the importance of having more trained vets in the country.
Bonaparte, 1 hour is a short time, and we thank you very much for coming and joining us today. And I think we'll invite you again so we can come and delve more into. Today we've talked a lot about milk production. We'll talk about meat and the producers of meat in the country and what they need to do.
Let me just to summarize.
Yes.
I want to inform our listeners that we have now what's called the Bachuma Livestock Export Zone that we are constructing. That will be a state-of-the-art once it is completed for export of live animals, number one. And also we want to expand it to also, once we bring on board a private investor who now do what's called the value addition. Now they'll be doing the slaughtering within that region and then exporting to the
Please tell our listeners where Bachuma is.
Bachuma is in Taita Taveta County.
Right.
Yes. That's it's good to tell them. Yes. You know, we are used to Bachuma because you just know where it is.
It's good to locate
but for our listeners, it is in Bachuma, and it's going to serve the entire coast region and northeastern region, and also part of the North Rift. But we shall be opening up other areas, because now we've got to go into what's called the value addition. That's the area that we are looking at.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, we've not
touched.
We've just done the introduction.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface in terms of meat. Harry Kimtai, PS Livestock, thank you very much for joining us. Asante sana. We'll hope to have you again soon.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. Spice up your life.